breaking the wall of ecological risk. How a cultural shift in economics and politics can ensure the Earth's security. Alejandro Litovsky, Earth Security Initiative, UK, with musical accompaniment by Anders Scherp.
The news of the fall of the Berlin Wall arrived in Buenos Aires, where I lived at that time.
Thank you. I would like to break the wall of national security. My sense is that if we crack the national security agenda, we're probably going to make progress in many of the things that we've been talking about today. And up to now, we've felt and we think that the national security of a country depends on its military power, on its industrial power, on its political power. And we begin to see new ecological climate threats as non-traditional threats, non-traditional security threats emerging. And we believe that we can manage those with these sorts of power we have. We can deploy the military in new ways. We can deploy economics and go towards a different investment strategy, and that we can manage. But I want to challenge that and help us think in a different way today. Last July, under the German presidency, which is quite interesting, in the UN Security Council, there was a big debate on climate change. And the outcome was a presidential statement that said that climate change is, without a question, a threat to international security. But what does that mean? Well, it means things like this. This came out 1 month afterwards, in August. And it's looking at the conflicts in the last, say, 50, 60 years, and since the 1950s. It proves a positive correlation between changes in global climate, i.e. the climate gets warmer, particularly in the equator, and the emergence of civil war and organized violence. For me, this doesn't quite do it because it's a very linear way of thinking, and it keeps within a very traditional mindset, which says we are organized in a certain way, and there are new climate threats and there are new hotspots where the US military talks about climate change as a threat amplifier. It's really going to amplify the threats and the conflicts that already exist. There's warmer weather, the harvest defaults, people go hungrier, the price of produce increases in the market, there's more instability, and so on. And so one of the walls, perhaps the most important wall that I want to try to break today, has to do with understanding that the real security threat lies in the disruption of the Earth system. And that, in effect, many of the Earth systems are a security system. They're life support systems. And here we have something, a scientific breakthrough in many ways, developed by the National Center for Atmospheric Research in the US. And what we see here is, in gray you see vapor, and in orange you see where that vapor is turning into rain. And the first thing that strikes you is that actually this is not a problem of the equator, right? The equatorial sort of region. Actually, where is this rain falling? Right? You see that the rain is falling in the US grain hub. The rain is actually falling in Brazil, in the Southern American, Brazil and Argentina, the $1 trillion industry of agribusiness. The rain is falling in China. We remember that last year the default over the suffering of the wheat harvest became really a matter of national security for the Chinese government that relies on one of those commodities for growing it domestically. And so what else do we see? We see that much of the rain that is falling in Brazil, for example, where 70% of Brazilian electricity is produced by hydropower plants, creates quite an interesting situation of energy security. Right? So it's not just an environmental, non-traditional threat. These things go to the core of economic power and national security understood in that way. And we will be challenged. But we're also challenged because this is not a problem of atmospheric physics. Right? What we see here is an interacting system where atmospheric physics actually interacts with land-based ecosystems. Right? See, look at the Amazon there, look at the Congo Basin. Look at the Congo Basin, how it's pumping. Right? It's beating almost like a heart. And what it's doing is recycling the rain and pumping it back into the atmosphere. And all the tropical rainforests, together, they're acting as one system and keeping this conveyor belt going. It's one complex machine that we really don't understand. So that we don't really understand what happens if we just take the Congo Basin. Well, what happens if we remove it, right? And we need to grapple with this uncertainty in terms of action. And so why don't we zoom into one of the pieces of this machine, and we look at the Amazon rainforest. First thing you see, the Amazon is not Brazil, it's 9 countries. Right? 9 countries that are having to coordinate the stewardship, and actually are quite uncoordinated at the moment. And so in green, you see where we are protecting the Amazon, where there's national reserves, where there's indigenous reserves, and so on. And in red here, you see deforestation. That deforestation there is very much driven in the Brazilian part by cattle ranching, and that is driven very much by global supply chains and global demand for meat. And so we know what's happening in the rest of the world with people eating more meat and so on. Then you see the fires, and the fires interact with climate in a really interesting way, potentially quite disastrous. And we know that in 2005 there was a very big drought in the Amazon, and scientists said this is 1 in 100-year event. Tremendous drought, the highest drought, deepest drought ever recorded since records began in the 1900s. 5 years later, 2010, an even greater drought that we couldn't predict, right? And we tend to think of the Amazon as the lungs of the planet. It's sinking carbon dioxide. Yes, the typical year it sinks 1.5 billion tons of carbon dioxide. But actually, when the fires and the drought interact, like in 2010, the Amazon rainforest was a net emitter of carbon dioxide of almost 8 billion tons, just as much as Russia's and China's emissions combined, right? And so that's fires. Then we look at roads. This is progress, right? This is being financed by development banks, by public pension funds. This is making the GDP of many of these countries grow. Brazil and Peru just celebrating bilateral deals to grow more roads, and they're building interoceanic roads to be able to export to China more easily through the Pacific, right? And this is very welcome. But actually, what roads do is they open new pathways into the forest and incomes, all sorts of things. Then you see industrial mining. Look at what's happening with mining, right? And we know that global commodity prices are growing. We know that when Standard & Poor downgraded the US sovereign debt a few months ago, what happened? Many of the investors flocked to gold, and the gold deposits in the Colombian Amazon are particularly rich, and that has driven an enormous pressure into the Amazon for exploiters, both legal and illegal, right? And so you begin to see how all these things are interconnected. And then we know that there's oil and gas. There's a lot of oil and gas, and a lot of the oil and gas is actually underneath the Amazon. And so we know what happens when these economic pressures, they're basically driving the political incentives to have no choice but to go and exploit. And in Ecuador, for example, where 60% of GDP comes from oil-related industries, it is very tough to imagine that we could shift to another sort of economy. And so you begin to get the picture, right? And this is hydropower. As I said, 70% of Brazil's energy matrix is hydropower-based. Increasingly, Peru, Bolivia, and other countries are turning to hydropower. And what happens with hydropower is not only that there is this big impact, as you see with the yellow section, but also that we need to start asking the question, wait a minute, where is the water coming from as the key input to the hydropower plant? And do we understand that we actually, by eroding the Amazon, we are eroding that base of input into that model? And this is something that traditional investment risk models are not terribly good at, because they look at individual firms. They're not understanding what are the systemic risks, and in particular from eroding this system. And so here you have the combined effect. This is what we're doing. What are we doing, right? When we understand that what is at stake is the big system. And so very quickly, the two things that I'm trying to do with this agenda is, on the one hand, we need to make a radical shift in how we understand risk and how that translates into economic policy, industrial policy, and the financial sector. For example, reinsurance industries ultimately will pay many of these bills. But the second thing I want to do is to try to explore ways of breaking walls in how we communicate this agenda, to make all of this complexity and all these unknowns a bit more intuitive to understand. And so one of the things we'll experiment with, and I want to call on my friend Anders Scherb from Sweden. We've been working for a while on exploring, and he's a musician, very good one, how can his work and how could we try to communicate this agenda in a different way? And so we'll do a little experiment, and you see what you think. And so we're going to turn back to this system, and we will try to understand how does it all fit together and what it means in terms of the Earth's security. Anders.
For your command, I just wanna hold your hand and maybe grow in your smile. We are only here. We are only here. We are only here.
5 seconds. Thank you very much. Thank you, Anders. Well, we began talking about security, national security, and the connections that exist with the Earth. Just wrap up by saying that breaking the walls between science, what we know in different silos in science, what we know in investment, in infrastructures, and what we know in politics is really the only chance we have in working out the politics that will ensure our long-term security. Thank you very much.